Good evening, and welcome back to the Sleepy Archive. Tonight, there is no need to do anything at all. You don't need to remember the dates. You don't need to follow every detail. This is history told slowly, the kind you're allowed to fall asleep to. So settle in. Let your shoulders sink into the bed. Let your breathing slow down. Tonight, we're going to wander through the alehouses and herb gardens of the medieval world. We're going to visit the monastery cellars where monks measured out daily rations of thick, dark beer. We're going to sit with the wise women who brewed sleep draughts from poppy and henbane. We're going to drift through the feast halls where spiced wines circled the table late into the night. Ordinary people, in an ordinary world, reaching for a little warmth, a little relief, a little blurring of the edges. Not so different, really, from tonight. Whenever you're ready, close your eyes. Let's begin. The village of Thornfield sits in the flat country of eastern England, somewhere in the middle years of the 14th century. There is no inn here. There is no tavern in the formal sense. What there is, at the far end of the village, past the blacksmith's yard and the stump of the old elm tree, is Agnes's house. You would know it by the ale stake. An ale stake is a long pole fixed above the door, sometimes hung with a bundle of holly or a small bush of evergreen leaves. When Agnes has a fresh batch of ale ready for sale, she puts the stake out. And the village knows. Agnes is somewhere in her 40s. She has a broad, weathered face and heavy hands from years of lifting barrels and stirring mash. She lives in a two-room cottage with a low ceiling and a packed earth floor and a hearth that never quite goes out. The smell in her house is a particular smell, thick and yeasty and warm, like bread left to rise too long in a damp room. She is an alewife. One of thousands across England, across France, across the whole of medieval Europe. Women who brewed and sold ale from their own homes, at their own hours, on their own terms. The work began days before the drinking did. Barley, or sometimes oats, or a mixture of the two, had to be malted first. Soaked in water until it sprouted, then dried slowly over a low fire. Then ground, coarsely, and mixed with hot water in the mash tun, and left to ferment, and strained, and left again, in large wooden barrels that Agnes kept against the far wall of her second room. The process was imprecise. The timing was learned through feel and smell. No thermometers. No hydrometers. No written recipes. For most alewives. Just knowledge passed between women, season after season, year after year. Tonight there are 8 men at Agnes's table. They sit on low stools or benches pulled close together. A tallow candle drips onto the wood. The fire gives the room its only other light, orange and unsteady. Outside, it is early October. The harvest is just in. There is a looseness in the air tonight that you only get at the end of a long working season, when the barns are full and the worst of it is behind you for another year. Agnes moves between them with a clay jug, pouring without being asked. The ale she pours is not the ale you might imagine. Medieval ale, proper ale, before hops came into common use in England, was brewed without them. The bitterness and preservative quality that hops provide was missing. Instead, the ale might be flavored with a blend of herbs called grut, bog myrtle, yarrow, wild rosemary. Each brewer had her own blend. Agnes uses mostly yarrow, dried in bundles and hung from a beam in the ceiling. The color of her ale would surprise you. Not the clear amber of a modern pint. Thick. Slightly cloudy. A dark brownish gold when it catches the candlelight. There are small particles suspended in it, bits of grain, remnants of the mash, a faint dusting of yeast that has not yet settled. The taste is yeasty and slightly sour. Dense and filling. More like liquid bread than what we would call beer. And it is relatively weak by the standards of today's commercial brews, though not as weak as people sometimes suppose. Ordinary ale of the medieval period was perhaps 2 to 4% alcohol, not unlike a modern session beer. Stronger Alehouse existed, brewed for feast days or celebrations, and these could climb higher. But the everyday stuff at Agnes's table is moderate. The men drink it slowly. There is no hurry. One of them, a tanner named Walter, has a wooden cup that has been in his family for 3 generations. The wood has darkened with age and absorbed the flavor of 1,000 different evenings. He holds it in both hands, the way you might hold a warm bowl of something on a cold night. His friend Martin sits beside him. Martin is a field worker who has spent the week scything the last of the barley from a field that belongs to the lord of the manor. He is tired in the deep way that only hard physical labor produces, not the buzzing, restless tiredness of too much sitting and staring, but the heavy, settled tiredness of a body that has spent itself. He takes a long, slow drink, sets the cup down, breathes out. The fire pops softly. There is something the ale does, gently, over the first cup. The knots in the shoulders begin to loosen. The back, which has been a dull ache all day, fades a little, not gone, just set at a distance behind glass. The thoughts, which tend to be practical and anxious thoughts during the working day, will the roof hold through winter? Is the cow sick? Will the Lord's reeve raise the rents again? The thoughts slow down. They are still there, but they seem less urgent. Walter and Martin and the 6 other men at Agnes's table are not drinking to become loud. They are not drinking to become someone else. They are drinking, in the simplest possible way, to feel a little less pressed against the edges of their lives. Ale was medicine, in a sense. Not in the herbs and roots sense, but in the psychological sense. In a world with no free time, no leisure as we understand it, no privacy, the alehouse was one of the only places where a man could sit without being asked to do something. No lord, no priest, no reeve. Just Agnes with her jug, and the fire, and the smell of yeast. There was a rule, in many villages, about the price of ale. Ale conners, official tasters, appointed by the local authority, would visit the alewife periodically and taste her product. If it was under strength or overpriced, she could be fined. The records of medieval courts are full of such fines. Agnes herself has been fined twice for selling short measure. She accepted the fine both times and went on brewing. The men stay for 2 hours, perhaps 3. The talk is unhurried. Someone mentions a dispute over a field boundary. Someone else heard there was trouble in the next village. Martin says nothing for long stretches at a time, which is not unusual for him. Toward the end of the evening, Agnes refills the cups one more time. The tallow candle has burned down to a stub. The fire is low. The men begin to stand, slowly, one by one. Not everyone in Thornfield drinks ale. Old Edmund, who lives alone in the smallest house in the village and who most people agree is somewhere between 60 and 80 years old, nobody knows exactly, drinks mead. Or rather, he keeps a small clay pot of mead at the back of his cottage, covered with a piece of cloth, and each evening he pours himself a cup and sits in his one chair beside the fire and drinks it slowly over the course of an hour. Mead is the older drink, much older than ale. It is, in its simplest form, honey dissolved in water and left to ferment. The bees do most of the work. The beekeeper does the rest. Edmund's mead is made from the honey of his own 2 hives, which stand at the edge of his garden behind the cottage. He has kept bees for 40 years. He knows their rhythms the way other men know the rhythms of their fields. His mead is thin and pale, slightly sweet but not cloying, not the heavy, syrupy thing that modern people sometimes imagine when they think of medieval mead. Old mead, properly fermented and left to clear, is delicate, golden. It smells of clover and something underneath the clover that has no easy name. He drinks it warm in winter, heated in a small pot at the hearth's edge. The effect of mead is different from the effect of ale, though the alcohol content may be similar or sometimes stronger. There is something about the sweetness, perhaps, or the smoothness, or just the quiet ritual of sitting alone with it, that makes the evening softer. Edmund has not slept well in years. He wakes before dawn, as old men tend to do, and spends the middle hours of the night staring at the ceiling thatch. But the hour after his mead is a good hour. A quiet hour. He doesn't think much about anything during that hour. The fire settles. The bees, dormant for winter, make no sound from the hives outside. The village is completely still. He finishes the cup, sets it on the floor beside the chair, closes his eyes, not to sleep, not yet, but just to rest them for a while. There were rules. Not the kind of rules that came from nowhere. The rules around ale and drinking in the medieval period were rooted in theology, in community order, and in genuine practical concern about what happened when people drank too much. The church had opinions. The Bible offered the example of Noah, who planted a vineyard after the flood, drank his own wine, and lay uncovered in his tent, to the embarrassment of his sons. Drunkenness was a sin. Not drinking itself, which was acceptable and in many contexts necessary, since water was often unsafe, but the excess of it. Sermons warned against the alehouse. Not because ale was evil, but because the alehouse was a place where the poor gathered away from the church's oversight, where debts were made and not repaid, where men might say things about the Lord or the bishop that they would not say in daylight. There were also practical rules. Feast days were the permitted occasions for heavier drinking, and feast days were more numerous than they might seem in the medieval calendar. Saints' days, harvest celebrations, weddings, baptisms, the great church feasts of Christmas and Easter and Pentecost. An adult in a medieval English village might have had 40 or 50 days a year that were understood as occasions for festivity, and on those days, drinking was not just permitted but expected. On ordinary workdays, the rules were more moderate. Agnes, at her table, would not have thought of herself as running a disreputable place. She was providing a service. She was part of the economic and social fabric of Thornfield in the same way the miller was, or the blacksmith. People needed what she made. The men who drank at her table went home to their families. They slept in their beds. They woke before dawn and went back to the fields. The ale had done its work. Walter walks home alone, through the narrow lane between Agnes's house and the church wall. The night is clear. The stars are very bright over the flat fields. There is nothing out here to block the sky, no hills, no trees along the field edges. Just the enormous dark vault of October above him. He is not drunk. Or if he is, it is a very mild version of drunk, a looseness in the knees, a slight glow behind the eyes, the edges of the world softened a little from what they were this morning. He walks carefully, because the lane has ruts from the cart that passed through yesterday, and you can't see them in this dark. He can hear an owl somewhere. Distant. The ale has taken the ache out of his back in the simple way that alcohol takes aches out of things. Not gone, but retreated. Tomorrow it will be back, louder than ever, but tonight he has been given a reprieve. He passes the church. The windows are dark. Matins won't be for hours yet. His cottage is at the near end of the village, which tonight means he has a shorter walk than most. He can see the faint orange line under his door. His wife has kept the fire going. She is almost certainly asleep. She goes to bed early and wakes early. She has no interest in the alehouse. He opens the door quietly. The room is warm and smells of smoke and something she cooked for supper that is now a cold remnant in the pot. He sits on the edge of the bed, pulls off his boots, lies down without lighting a candle. The straw mattress is dense and solid beneath him. The woolen blanket is thick. His wife breathes steadily beside him, her face turned away, already somewhere deep in her sleep. Walter closes his eyes. The room is warm. The fire ticks. Outside, the fields are still. He is asleep before he knows he is gone. Agnes stays up longer than anyone else. She has cups to collect and rinse, the fire to bank, the remaining ale in the barrel to check. She draws off a cup and holds it to the light. Still good. Another 2 days before it starts to turn. She works quietly, in the way of someone who has done the same things in the same order for many years. There is no need to think about the sequence. Her hands know it. The last candle burns down. She doesn't replace it. She knows her own house. She rinses the final cup in the bucket of water she keeps by the door, dries it with a rag, sets it on the shelf with the others. Her lower back aches. It almost always aches. The lifting, the stirring, the bending over the mashed tun, the work of brewing is not gentle on the body. She is not old, but the work has aged her faster than she might have aged otherwise. She stands by the fire for a moment before going to bed. Just stands there, warming the front of her legs, watching the low red pulse of the coals. 8 men came tonight. That's reasonable for a Tuesday. She made a small profit. She climbs the ladder to the sleeping platform above. Her daughter is already asleep up there, curled against the wall, her breath slow and even. Agnes lies down beside her without disturbing her. The house is quiet now. The ale stake is still out above the door, but it means nothing in the dark. Tomorrow she will start a new batch. Tonight, she is done. By the time the church bell sounds midnight, a single, distant toll, barely audible from the furthest cottages, the village of Thornfield is almost entirely still. The dogs have stopped barking. The pigs in their pens have settled. The chickens, long since roost, make no sound. In the darkness of 8 different houses, 8 men sleep with the gentle weight of moderate ale inside them, and they sleep soundly, in the simple physical way of people who have worked with their bodies all day and drunk with their neighbors in the evening. It is not a complicated happiness. It is not a sophisticated pleasure. It is just the warmth of the evening and the weight of the blanket and the quiet of the October night settling over the flat fields. And so we leave them to their night. But we have more of the evening to wander through. A little further out from the village, past the mill stream and the edge of the common, there is a cottage set slightly apart from the others. You might walk past it in the daytime without looking at it twice. But certain people know it. Certain people have come here in the small hours, when something was needed that the parish priest couldn't give them. Let's drift in that direction now. No need to sit up. Just keep listening. Her name, in the village records, the ones that survive, which are few, is Joan. She is not a witch. Or rather, she would not call herself one, and the people of the village would not call her one either, at least not most of the time. She is the wise woman, or the cunning woman, or simply old Joan, depending on who is speaking and what they need. She has lived in this cottage for 30 years. Before her, her mother lived here. Before that, someone else, some woman whose name no one remembers anymore, lived here doing the same work. The cottage is small. Single room downstairs, ladder up to a low loft. But what makes it different from the other cottages in the village is the garden. It runs from the back of the house to the stream, and it is kept with a kind of fierce attention. Every plant in it has a purpose. Most of them are plants you would find in any medieval household garden, leeks and cabbages and onions along the near beds, and then further back, in the shadier ground near the stream, the other things. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them are strange. Some of them look like nothing at all, small and woody, dried out after the end of summer, waiting. Joan knows every one of them. Not from books, she cannot read, but from memory. From her mother's memory before that. Tonight the garden is dark and still. The frost hasn't come yet, but it is close. You can feel it in the damp air, the cold that comes off the stream. Joan is inside, at the table, sorting through a collection of small clay pots. She does this every few evenings. Checking the stock. What is running low? What needs replenishing before the winter? The pot at the far end of the row is small and sealed with a piece of wax cloth. Joan picks it up, holds it for a moment, sets it back. Henbane. The plant is called henbane because it is poisonous to hens and to most other creatures, including humans, if taken in the wrong amount. Its Latin name is Hyoscyamus niger. It grows wild in places, along roadsides, in disturbed ground, in the dry earth near walls. Joan also grows it, deliberately, in a corner of her garden that she keeps fenced off from the chickens. It is not an unusual plant to find in a medieval herb garden. It appears in manuscripts. Hildegard of Bingen, the great German abbess who wrote about plants in the 12th century, mentions it. It was used to treat toothache and pain, to help people sleep, to calm the mind in states of agitation. In very small doses, very carefully measured, it produces a warm, drowsy feeling. A loosening of the body, a slowness of thought. In slightly larger doses, it produces something else. The plant contains scopolamine and hyoscine, compounds that act on the brain in ways that medieval people could not have understood chemically, but understood perfectly well by observation. The person who has taken too much henbane might see things, hear things, lose the ability to tell dream from waking. Joan has seen this happen. Once, long ago, a man came to her in pain from a tooth that had been festering for weeks, and she gave him a preparation that was stronger than she intended, and he sat in her chair for 2 hours in a state she can only describe as elsewhere, his eyes open, but looking at something she couldn't see, speaking in fragments, not distressed exactly, but utterly unreachable. He recovered fully. The tooth came out 2 days later, during which time he said he barely felt it. She keeps the henbane pot sealed tightly. She is very careful with it. More often, what people come to Joan for is simpler. They want to sleep. Not the soft, ordinary sleep of a tired body settling at the end of a long day. Something deeper than that. Something that will pull them under and keep them there through the pain, or through the grief, or through the rattling, anxious wakefulness that comes after a fever. For this, Joan uses poppy. Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy, was grown in medieval Europe, and its properties were known. Not fully understood, not chemically described, but known in the practical sense. The plant produces a sticky substance that can be made into a preparation that relieves pain and induces sleep. In medieval England, this was not considered remarkable. The poppy is mentioned in Anglo-Saxon leech books, the earliest medical manuscripts in English. It appears in monastery gardens. It was used by monks for patients in the infirmary. Joan grows a row of them along the south-facing wall of her cottage, where they get the most sun. In summer they flower, soft pink and purple and white, petals like crumpled silk. After the petals fall, the seed heads remain, round and pale green. She scores them with a small blade and collects what comes out. The preparation she makes is not precise by any modern standard. She steeps poppy seeds and dried poppy husks in water, sometimes with a little honey to make it drinkable, sometimes with valerian, another sedative plant, added in for good measure. The result is a dark, bitter liquid that smells of something musty and green. She gives it to mothers with restless children. She gives it to old men whose joints will not let them sleep. She gave it, once, to a man whose wife had died and who had not slept in 2 weeks and who was starting to say frightening things. He came back 3 days later looking older and quieter, but alive. She asked him if he had slept. He said he had slept. There is one plant in Joan's garden that she almost never uses and never sells. It grows at the very back, near the fence by the stream. It is not particularly impressive to look at. Large dark green leaves close to the ground, a purple flower in spring, a small yellowish fruit in autumn that some people call mandrake apple. The root is the thing. The root of the mandrake plant is thick and forked, and in some specimens it takes a shape vaguely resembling a human figure, 2 root legs descending from a thick body. This resemblance is enough. In the medieval imagination, the mandrake is one of the most powerful and dangerous of all plants. There are stories. The mandrake screams when pulled from the earth, and the sound is fatal to whoever hears it. To pull one safely, you must tie a dog to it, then walk away. The dog pulls, the mandrake screams, the dog dies. You come back, safe, and collect the root. Joan knows these stories. She finds them, in the privacy of her own thoughts, slightly amusing. She has pulled mandrake from the ground many times without ceremony, without dogs, without harm. It makes no sound. But the stories are not entirely wrong about the danger. The mandrake root contains compounds similar to those in henbane, scopolamine, atropine. In sufficient quantity, it can cause delirium, unconsciousness, or worse. In small amounts, combined with other plants in a preparation known as dwale, an Old English word for a narcotic drink used in surgery, it can produce a state of deep unconsciousness deep enough for a limb to be amputated. Medieval surgery was not good surgery by any modern standard. But it was not done entirely without anesthesia. Dwale, or something like it, was known. Joan has a written version of the recipe somewhere, copied out by a monk who passed through many years ago and left it as partial payment for a remedy she gave him. She cannot read it herself, but she knows the ingredients by memory. She has never used it on anyone. She hopes she never will. In autumn, Joan spends several days drying and storing the season's harvest from the garden. The ceiling of her cottage is hung with bundles of plants tied with string. Yarrow and wormwood and mugwort along the rafters closest to the door, where they get the most air. Valerian, with its distinctive smell, which some people find pleasant and others find alarming, something between dirty socks and cheese, in a far corner. The poppy heads are laid out on a cloth near the fire to dry slowly, at a low heat. The henbane is already in its pots. The smell in the cottage during drying season is extraordinary, not unpleasant. Exactly, though parts of it are sharp, or medicinal, or pungent. It is the smell of a whole summer of growing compressed into a single room. Green and dry and faintly dusty and full of something living. Joan moves through it all without noticing it anymore. To her it smells like home. She bundles the dried valerian root carefully. It is the one she reaches for most. Valerian is gentle. You can give it to almost anyone. It calms. It slows the pulse slightly. It makes sleep more likely without doing anything dramatic. She also uses chamomile, which grows like a weed in every garden, and lemon balm, which is mild and sweet and useful mainly for children. And lavender, though lavender is not common in this part of England, it grows better in warmer places. And what she has was traded from a traveling merchant 3 years ago and is almost gone. There is fennel for digestion, elderflower for fever, plantain for wounds. The line between what we would call medicinal herbs and what we would call psychoactive plants is not, in Joan's world, a meaningful distinction. All plants do something to the body. Some are more powerful than others. Skill lies in knowing which ones, and how much, and when. She goes to bed late, after the last of the bundles are hung. The ceiling is so full of drying plants that it looks, in the low firelight, like she is sleeping in a forest. The knock comes well after midnight. Joan is still awake. She often is, in the deep middle of the night. She has always been a light sleeper and a late waker. She reads this not as a problem, but as a characteristic, the way some people are tall and some are short. She opens the door. A young woman is standing there, someone Joan recognizes from the mill. She looks exhausted in the hollow way of someone who has not slept properly in days. She holds something bundled in her arms, a small child, asleep. The woman speaks quietly. The child has been sick. A fever, mostly broken now, but the nights are terrible. He wakes every hour, screaming, won't settle, and she and her husband are both beyond what they can bear. Joan asks how old the child is. 3 years. She asks about the fever. Is it really gone, or just quieter? Really gone, the woman thinks. He's eating again. Joan nods. She goes to her shelf, brings down the valerian, the chamomile. She measures carefully, by sight and long habit, into a small cloth pouch. She explains how to steep it. Not boiling. She is specific about this. Water that is hot, but not boiling, for the valerian. A little honey after, to make the child take it. The woman asks if it will hurt him. Joan says no. She says she has given it to smaller children than this. The woman pays with a half-dozen eggs, which Joan is glad to have. She watches the woman walk back into the dark toward the mill. The child doesn't stir in her arms. Joan closes the door. The fire is almost out. She adds a small piece of wood, waits until it catches, then climbs up to the sleeping loft. Outside, the night is as dark and cold and still as it has been all evening. She is asleep within minutes. What do people dream in a medieval village in October in the year 1280? They dream the way all people dream, in images that follow their own logic, in places that are almost familiar, with the urgency of feelings that have no clear source. A village woman might dream of the cow that gave no milk in August, might dream of her own mother, long dead, standing in a field with her back turned, might dream of the river in summer, the water cold against her feet. The herbs help. Not by making the dreams, the mind makes the dreams itself, but by smoothing the passage down into sleep, by loosening the body from its daytime holdings, so that the descent is gentler. Medieval people understood sleep differently than we do. Sleep was not merely a biological process. It was a state in which the soul was closer to other realms, the divine, the prophetic, sometimes the dangerous. Dreams were messages, or warnings, or the wanderings of a spirit partly freed from the body. The Church was careful about this. Too much credit given to dreams was a step toward superstition, toward folk magic, toward the kind of knowledge that the Church preferred to control. But the theology was not simple. God spoke to prophets in dreams. The Bible was full of significant dreams. Joan thinks about none of this. She is asleep. The dried herbs above her head give off, in the warmth of the cottage, a faint trace of scent. Valerian, chamomile. The distant memory of lavender. Her breathing slows. Her hands, open at her sides, are still. Outside, the garden sleeps. Or not sleeps, exactly. Plants don't sleep, though they respond to darkness, though their chemistry shifts at night, though the poppy seed heads hold their contents more tightly in the cold hours before dawn. The mandrake sits at the back of the garden, close to the fence. Its leaves are flat against the earth. The frost will come soon, and when it does they will turn brown and collapse, and the plant will retreat entirely into the root. Underground, in the wet October soil, the root holds its shape. Forked. Heavy. Twisted slightly at the lower end. It makes no sound. The stream runs past the fence in the dark. Water cold enough to ache. And the cottage is still. And the village is still. And the flat country stretches away in all directions under a sky full of stars. We drift away now from England and from October, from the village and the wise woman's garden. We travel south and further back in time. To the stone country of France, to the valley of the Saône, to the long walls and the bell towers of a Benedictine monastery in the early years of the 13th century. There are no wise women here. But there is, in the long stone cellars beneath the main building, a different kind of knowledge. Stay with me. Let's go there now. The Abbey of St. Hilaire, a fictional name for a type of place that was entirely real, lies in a valley between two low hills, surrounded on three sides by vineyards and on the fourth by a bend in the river. It was founded 200 years ago, give or take, and since then it has grown in the slow, deliberate way that monasteries grow. A new wing added here, a wall extended there, the church rebuilt larger after the original roof fell in during a storm. There are 43 monks here at the moment. They live by the rule of Saint Benedict, which is to say they live by a schedule that divides the day and night into regular intervals of prayer, work, reading, and sleep. It is now late in the evening. The bell for Compline, the last prayer of the day, sounded an hour ago. The monks have dispersed from the church to their cells. But one figure moves along the corridor below ground level, carrying a candle toward the cellar. He is Brother Thomas. He is 50 years old, slightly overweight in the way of a man who has eaten well, but not excessively for many decades, with a round, calm face and thick hands. He has been cellarer of this monastery for 18 years. He knows the cellar the way Joan knows her garden, by touch, in the dark, after a lifetime. He is not here for anything unusual. He is doing what he does every evening, checking the barrels. Each monk of this abbey receives, per day, approximately 1 pint of wine and a somewhat larger amount of beer. This is not considered excessive. The rule of Saint Benedict specifically addresses the question of drink. Wine, it acknowledges, is not proper for monks, and yet, it says, since monks in our time cannot be persuaded of this, let us at least agree that we should drink temperately and not to satiety. Temperately, in this context, means roughly a pint a day, per person. For 43 monks, that is a great deal of wine to manage. The monastery's own vineyards produce most of it. The grapes are harvested in September, pressed in the winery just outside the main wall, fermented in great wooden vats, and then transferred to barrels in the cellar where Brother Thomas keeps them. The wine here is what you might expect from a Burgundy-adjacent monastery of the 13th century, rough, dark, with high tannins, not particularly delicate. It is not made for pleasure. Or rather, it is made for the pleasure that comes from a regular, modest quantity of wine at the end of a long day of prayer and labor. The beer is different. The monastery also brews a dark, dense ale, similar to what Agnes brews in Thornfield, but brewed at larger scale by monks in a dedicated brewery inside the monastery walls. This is the staple drink for the lay brothers and the servants, and it supplements the wine ration on days when the wine supply is short. On fast days, the beer ration increases slightly. Food is reduced or eliminated, but beer remains. Because beer is not, in the theological calculus of the medieval monastery, food. It is drink. And drink is permitted even on fast days. Brother Thomas moves along the row of barrels, pressing his hand against the wood of each one in turn. He knows what he is feeling for. A barrel that has gone to vinegar sounds different when you tap it, hollow, slightly wrong. He can also tell by the temperature of the wood. A barrel that is fermenting too fast will be warmer than the others. Tonight, everything seems in order. The barrels are cool and even. The air in the cellar smells of damp stone and oak and the deep, specific smell of aging wine. Something between fruit and earth and something else, something ancient and organic, that has no word in any language he knows. He draws a small amount from one of the newer barrels, from the harvest this past September, and holds it in a clay cup, tilting it toward the candle. The color is very dark, almost black in this light. He tastes it, holds it in his mouth for a moment, swallows slowly. Still too young. Sharp. The tannins are dominant. It needs another few months at least. Brother Thomas has no formal training in winemaking, or not formal in the academic sense. He learned from the monk who was cellarer before him, who learned from the one before that, in a chain of direct transmission that goes back to the founding of the abbey. The knowledge lives in the body, the way all deep practical knowledge does. He draws a second small cup, this time from an older barrel, from the harvest 3 years past. This is better, much better. Smooth. A softness under the fruit. A complexity he recognizes from year to year, the signature of this cellar, these barrels, this soil. He finishes it slowly. Not in a rush. The candle flickers as a draft comes through somewhere. Thomas shelters it with his palm, and it straightens again. On a shelf along the far wall of the cellar, separate from the main barrels, there are a dozen smaller vessels, each sealed with wax and labeled with a small piece of parchment. These are the infused wines. The monastery infirmary is through the church in the eastern wing. Brother Ansel is the infirmarian, the monk responsible for the care of the sick, the elderly, and the brothers who come to him with the ordinary small ailments of hard monastic life, strains, chest colds, digestive complaints, the perpetual problem of badly aching backs. For all of these, Ansel has learned to turn to wine as a base. Wine keeps. Wine absorbs the properties of herbs steeped in it. Wine can be measured out in small amounts and given to a bedridden man without much fuss. The small vessels here contain wine steeped with wormwood, for digestion, for intestinal complaints, for the sluggishness that comes with too little movement. Wine steeped with sage, for throat ailments, for persistent coughs. Wine steeped with rosemary, said to strengthen the memory, to warm the blood in cold months. Wine steeped with lavender, for headaches, for anxiety, for the monk who hasn't slept in a week. And in one particularly small and carefully sealed vessel, wine steeped with Theriac, an ancient compound medicine that originated in the classical world and had by this period become a kind of universal remedy, containing dozens of ingredients, among them a small proportion of opium. Brother Ansel uses the Theriac wine sparingly. Only for the worst pain. Only when a man is in a state that will not otherwise resolve. Brother Thomas doesn't use any of these himself. He is, for his age, fairly healthy. He sleeps well. His digestion gives him no trouble. He stands among the vessels for a moment, the candle making long shadows along the stone walls. Then he turns and walks back through the cellar and up the stairs toward the dormitory. The brewery is off the courtyard, in a long stone building that also houses the granary. 2 lay brothers, servants of the monastery who have taken some vows, but not the full profession of a choir monk, work there during the day, under the general supervision of Brother Thomas. The process of brewing in a monastery is not so different from Agnes's process in Thornfield, except that it is larger, more regular, and more precisely recorded. Monasteries kept accounts. The Abbey of St. Hilaire has brewing records going back 60 years, noting the quantities of grain used, the quantities of beer produced, the dates of each batch. The beer is brewed with gruit in this period. It is the early 13th century, and hops have not yet become the standard additive for beer in this part of France. The gruit blend used here is somewhat different from Agnes's, more bog myrtle, less yarrow. The recipe was established by a previous cellarer 50 years ago and has not changed since. The lay brothers brew on Mondays and Thursdays, winter and summer, except on major feast days. The beer they make is what contemporaries call cervoise, a dark, thick ale that is consumed young, within a week or 2 of brewing. It is denser and more filling than the monastery wine, and considerably lower in alcohol, and for the lay brothers and servants who do the physical labor of the monastery, the building, the farming, the cooking, the endless maintenance of an institution this size, it is the primary drink of the working day. A lay brother carrying stone for a new wall might drink several pints of it during a day of heavy work and not think twice. It is not the kind of drinking that produces drunkenness. It is the kind of drinking that keeps a working body hydrated and fed and able to continue. The monks eat in silence. This is the rule. During meals in the refectory, one monk, on a rotating duty, reads aloud from a religious text or a saint's life while the others eat. The sound of his voice fills the long room while the monks communicate, when they must, by a system of hand signs that they have all learned. The tables are long and plain. The food is simple: bread, soup, perhaps dried fish, vegetables from the garden in the warmer months. On Sundays and feast days, the diet expands slightly. And with each meal, the wine. It comes in small clay cups, carried by the younger monks from the kitchen. 1 cup per person, poured from a jug, not more. The monks drink it as they eat, slowly, without particular attention to it. It is part of the meal rather than the point of the meal. There is no lingering over it, no comparison of vintages, no conversation about it. But its effect is real even so. The refectory is warm in the evenings, heated by the kitchen on one side and by the bodies of 43 people sitting close together. After a day of prayer and work and silence, the wine adds something small and real to the warmth. A loosening, a slight softening. The monk who reads aloud continues at his steady pace. His voice doesn't rise or fall dramatically. It is the voice of the archive, the voice that tells you something that happened long ago, in a place that no longer exists, among people who are all gone now. The candles burn. The monks eat. After Compline, the great silence begins. From the last prayer of the day until the morning bell for Matins, which comes long before dawn, at 2 in the morning, or sometimes 3, no monk is to speak. This is not a punishment. It is understood in the Benedictine tradition as a mercy, a gift of quiet. Brother Thomas walks to his cell in the dormitory. The cell is small. A bed frame with a straw mattress, a woolen blanket, a small wooden shelf with a psalter and one other book, a single candle in a clay holder that he will not light tonight, because there is still enough faint light coming through the narrow window. He sits on the edge of the bed. The wine from supper is a small warmth at the center of his chest. Not much. Not enough to call any kind of effect. Just the distant acknowledgement that something was drunk. He thinks of the barrels downstairs. The new batch from September. Another few months. He doesn't think of anything else. He lies down. Pulls the blanket up. The dormitory is cold. It is always cold, in a stone building, no matter what time of year. He has learned over 18 years to sleep anyway. The cold is simply what nights are made of here. Outside, the vineyard is completely dark. The vines have lost their leaves. The rows are bare and skeletal in the night. He closes his eyes. In 4 hours, the bell will ring. It will ring in the cold, deep dark of early morning, a sound that breaks through whatever dream is happening, that brings 43 monks to their feet before they are fully awake, that begins the cycle of prayer again. Some of the monks find it difficult, especially the younger ones, who have not yet trained their bodies to the rhythm, who lie in their cells in the minute before the bell, already dreading it. Brother Thomas does not dread it. After 18 years, he wakes just before it rings. His body has memorized the shape of the night. But that is hours from now. For now, the abbey is still. The candles in the church have been extinguished. The vineyard is dark. The river moves past the far wall without any sound that penetrates the stone. The wine in the barrels continues its slow process in the cellar. The bacteria and yeasts working in the dark, transforming sugar into something else, patient and unhurried. Everything is quiet. We leave the abbey now and travel forward in time by 100 years or so, and north again, back to England. It is the mid-14th century. Not a peaceful era. The plague has come and gone and come again. The 100 Years' War moves slowly forward. Life is uncertain in a specific, pressing way. But there are still feast days. And in the manors and great houses of England, the feast is something else entirely from what we have seen tonight. Let's go there now. Through the gate and into the hall. The Hall of Sir William Creston, which is a fictional name for a fictional manor, stands near the town of Norwich in the county of Norfolk, and tonight it is the night of Michaelmas. The 29th of September. The Feast of the Archangel Michael. One of the great quarter days of the medieval year, when accounts are settled, rents are paid, and the well-to-do eat. The hall is large by village standards, though modest by the standards of the great magnates of England. Timber-framed, with a high-timbered ceiling from which smoke from the central hearth drifts upward toward a louvre in the roof. Rushes on the floor, dried and sprinkled with herbs, rosemary and mint, to mask the smell of the dogs that move freely among the feet of the guests. Trestle tables have been set up in 3 rows. The top table, where Sir William sits with his wife and the 2 most important guests, runs across the end of the hall. The side tables run down its length. 26 people at dinner tonight, not counting the servants who move along the edges of the room, carrying, pouring, removing. The candles are beeswax, not tallow, which smokes and smells. On a feast night, you bring out the good candles. And the wine. The first wine to arrive at the table is not plain wine. It arrives in a tall pewter jug, carried by the butler, a young man of about 20 who has been in Sir William's service for 3 years, and whose entire professional identity at this moment is the care and serving of this jug. He pours it carefully, in order of precedence, beginning with Sir William. This is Hippocras. Hippocras is spiced wine, wine to which a blend of spices has been added, along with honey or sugar, and sometimes a small amount of an herb preparation known as grains of paradise. The name comes from Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician, via a cone-shaped straining cloth called a Hippocrates sleeve through which the mixture is filtered. The spices in this particular batch, Sir William's cook has her own recipe, include cinnamon, ginger, long pepper, a little cloves, and a pinch of something the cook gets from a spice merchant in Norwich and calls simply the Eastern powder, the exact composition of which she considers her own business. The effect of Hippocras in the glass is extraordinary by the standards of what was available before the spice trade reached this level of complexity. The wine is warm and richly aromatic, and the cinnamon and ginger give it a heat that starts in the mouth and moves down the throat and arrives in the chest as something between a glow and a burn. It is also, by this point in the evening, making everyone at the table feel slightly more at ease than they did when they arrived. Sir William's wine comes from Bordeaux, which is still English territory in 1360. The Treaty of Bretigny has been signed earlier this year, and Aquitaine remains, for now, under the English crown. This matters because it means the wine is relatively recent and relatively good and arrived without too many weeks at sea. Those spices in the Hippocras have traveled a very long way to reach this cup. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka. Pepper from India, multiple kinds of pepper, long pepper and black pepper, and the grains of paradise that come from West Africa. Cloves from the islands that Europeans will one day call the Moluccas, though in 1360 the route there is controlled by Arab and Indian and Venetian merchants, and is not entirely understood by any English cook. The spice trade is one of the organizing economic forces of the medieval world. Spices are expensive. They have to be, given the distances and the number of hands through which they pass. The amount of cinnamon in this jug of Hippocras cost Sir William's household more than a week's wages for a field worker. And spices are not only for flavor. The medieval medical understanding of spices draws from an ancient Greek system involving 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and 4 corresponding qualities: hot, cold, moist, dry. Spices, being largely hot and dry in this system, are understood to warm and dry the body. They aid digestion. They balance the excess coldness of wine. They counteract the heaviness of rich food. The Hippocras, in this framework, is not simply a pleasurable drink. It is a medically reasonable drink for the beginning of a large meal. It prepares the stomach. It readies the humors. This is how the medieval mind reconciles medicine and pleasure. They are not separate categories. The thing that tastes good and makes you feel warm often genuinely helps within this system. Whether the system is correct or not, the cinnamon is extraordinary, and the evening is getting warmer. The meal continues. The hall fills with the sound of people talking, the soft percussion of cups on wood, the movement of dogs below the tables hoping for fallen pieces of bread. Sir William is not a heavy drinker. His wife, Lady Eleanor, drinks carefully, a few sips of Hippocras to start, then water well into the meal, then a cup of wine toward the end. She has learned, over years of feasts, that it is better to remain clear-headed through the entire evening and to drink once everyone else has already become somewhat less clear-headed. But others at the table are drinking more freely. A neighbor of Sir William's, a man with a red face and the confident bearing of someone who has never in his life worried about money, is on his fourth cup and has been telling the same story about a horse for the last 10 minutes. He is not precisely drunk. He is pleasantly above the baseline, his voice slightly louder, his gestures slightly larger, his interest in his own story considerably greater than anyone else's. The servants are skilled at managing this. They refill cups on cue, dilute slightly when asked to by the lady of the house with a private gesture, slow down the pouring when the stage of the evening doesn't yet call for it. Medieval wine service was an art. The butler who manages it well is worth more than a butler who cannot read the room. The candles burn steadily in their iron holders. The rushes on the floor have been disturbed by the dogs and by the feet of the guests, and now release their herbs smell more strongly than before, rosemary and something crushed and green. Late in the feast, when the main meal has been eaten and cleared away and the table is down to nuts and dried fruit and small sweet pastries, a second jug appears. This one is different from the Hippocras. This is claret, clear red wine, sweetened with sugar and lightly spiced, thinner and lighter than the Hippocras that opened the evening. It is the wine of endings, the wine of sitting back. Sir William pours it himself for the two guests at the top table. This is deliberate, a sign of favor, of the personal attention of the host. The guests receive the gesture with appropriate acknowledgement. By now the hall is quieter than it was. Some of the guests from the lower tables have gone home or found a corner to sleep in. The dogs have settled under the tables. The fire in the hearth has burned down from its earlier blaze to a thick, steady orange glow. One of the candles goes out. No one replaces it. Lady Eleanor has her cup of wine in front of her and is talking quietly to the woman beside her, who is the wife of a merchant from Norwich and who is, Lady Eleanor has decided over the course of this evening, considerably more interesting than she had expected. Sir William is listening to something, or half listening. He is comfortable in the way that comes from good wine and a successful feast, and the particular rightness of being in your own hall at the end of a warm day. The guest with the red face has stopped talking about the horse. The evening is settling. What the wine has done, tonight at Sir William's Hall, is roughly the same thing it does every time it is drunk in every hall and every cottage in this century. It loosened the room. It made the talking easier. It made the silences less uncomfortable. It softened the gap between Sir William's place in the world and the merchant's wife's place in the world enough that Lady Eleanor could spend 2 hours genuinely enjoying a conversation with someone she would normally have little reason to speak to. In the medieval understanding, good wine is part of good hospitality. Withholding it is a kind of rudeness. Offering it generously is a kind of generosity. There is a whole theology of the table in the medieval period. The table as the place where distinctions of rank are temporarily softened by the fact of eating and drinking together. This is, of course, not a complete softening. The distinctions of rank are still entirely present and will reassert themselves tomorrow morning. But for the duration of the feast, something is permitted that isn't permitted in the ordinary course of the day. The evening moves toward its close. The fire in the hearth burns lower and lower. The candles in their holders are almost all out now. Sir William stands. This is the signal. His guests stand as well. There is a formal exchange, thanks offered, received, and returned, and then the hall begins to empty. The butler remains to extinguish the last candle and bank the fire. The hall is cold once the hearth has been banked. The butler works alone in the near dark, moving efficiently from one task to the next. The cups collected. The table linens removed and shaken outside. The rushes pushed to one side. They will be replaced tomorrow. The dogs have found their corners. 2 of them curl together near the dying fire. Sir William and Lady Eleanor have retired to their private chamber above the hall. The house is quiet. The merchant and his wife are in the guest room at the far end of the building. The merchant is already asleep. He fell asleep during the last cup of wine, sitting upright, which his wife found both embarrassing and slightly endearing. The neighbor with the red face made it back to his own manor, presumably. The butler watched him ride out and thought he sat his horse well enough. The hall is almost entirely dark now. The banked fire gives a faint orange crack of light at the hearth's edge. The smell of the evening, wine and wax, and the herb-scattered rushes and roasted meat and wood smoke, hangs in the cold air. By morning the smell will be fainter. By tomorrow evening it will be almost gone. The butler steps out into the courtyard for a moment before going to sleep. The night is cold and clear. The stars are out. He stands there for a moment. Then he goes inside and pulls the door closed behind him. The manor sleeps now the way all places sleep after a feast, with a kind of settled, replete quality that ordinary nights don't have. The feast happened. The wine circled the table. The Hippocras warmed the first hour. The claret gentled the last. The conversation happened and will not entirely be forgotten. The merchant's wife will remember, in the morning, what she and Lady Eleanor talked about, and be pleasantly surprised by how much she liked her. Lady Eleanor will remember the same. These are small things. But the medieval feast existed to make small things happen. To create, out of the ordinary divisions of rank and occupation and gender and wealth, a temporary space in which people might speak to each other as if they had known each other longer than they have. The wine helps with that. It was designed to. And so the hall settles into its cold, dark, satisfied stillness. We leave it now and go somewhere smaller. Further into the city. Into the narrow streets of London, with their shop fronts and their smells of damp stone and animal and tallow smoke. There is a shop here that is neither an alehouse nor a feast hall. But the things that move through it are not so different from what we have been following all evening. Come inside. The shop is on a lane off Cheapside, in the city of London, in the year 1382. It is narrow and deep, with a low ceiling and shelves along every wall from floor to ceiling, and the shelves are full. Jars of glass and clay and pewter, small wooden boxes, rolled parcels of dried things tied with string, bundles hanging from hooks in the ceiling. The whole room smells of something complex, spice and resin and dryness, and underneath it all something slightly sweet that is harder to name. The apothecary is a man named John, and he is 53 years old and has spent 35 of those years in this trade. His father was an apothecary too, in the same building, and taught him most of what he knows before dying of a chest fever when John was 21. The rest John learned from books, from older apothecaries in the guild, from the steady accumulation of experience that comes from watching what works and what does not. He is closing up for the night. The shutters are half folded across the front of the shop. The candle on the counter has burned down to its holder. He moves along the shelves, checking, a habit, not a necessity. Nothing has been misplaced. Nothing has run out that needs ordering before Friday. He pauses at one section of the middle shelf. The herbs he buys from the country, dried valerian from Cambridgeshire, lavender from a Cistercian monastery in Hampshire, dried poppy heads from a grower in Kent whose product is consistently reliable. And next to those, the things that come from further away. The most expensive item in John's shop, by considerable distance, is a preparation called Theriac. Theriac has an ancient history. It was supposedly developed by Mithridates, the king of Pontus, in the century before the Common Era, a man so afraid of being poisoned that he spent years developing the perfect antidote to all poisons. Later, the physician Galen elaborated it into an enormous compound medicine with dozens of ingredients. By 1382, Theriac has been in continuous use, in one form or another, for over 1,000 years. It contains many things, depending on who made it and where. Viper flesh, dried and powdered. Long pepper. Cinnamon. Myrrh. Saffron. Numerous herbs of varying specificity. And opium. The opium is not a secret ingredient. It is listed openly in the recipes. It is understood to be one of the primary active components, the part responsible for Theriac's most reliably useful property, which is pain relief. John's Theriac comes from Venice. This is standard. Venetian Theriac, Theriaca Andromache, made according to the formula established by Andromachus, physician to Nero, is considered the finest available and commands a price to match. He keeps it in a sealed pewter box on the highest shelf. Only his most serious customers receive it, for only his most serious cases. A small quantity prescribed for someone in acute pain. A carefully measured dose for a man recovering from surgery. Once, for a woman whose physician could not account for her symptoms, but whose suffering was evident, a trial preparation to see if it would help. It helped. John himself has no opinion about the mechanisms involved. He knows what Theriac does and when to recommend it. The why is a matter for physicians and philosophers. On a lower shelf, more accessible, are the simpler poppy preparations. Dried poppy seeds. Dried poppy husks. A small amount of poppy syrup, a preparation he makes himself in the back room, by steeping the husks in water and reducing the liquid slowly over a gentle fire and adding honey at the end. These are far less powerful than Theriac. They are used for common things: toothache, headache, the cough that keeps a sick person from sleeping, the sleeplessness that follows fever. They are also used by people who have no specific medical complaint, but who simply cannot sleep, or who are anxious, or who are in a kind of low, grinding suffering that has no good name in the medical vocabulary of 1382. John does not judge these customers. He knows the city. He knows what it does to people, the noise, the density, the constant press of other humans, the chronic financial uncertainty that runs through almost every level of London society below the very wealthy. A weaver who works 12 hours a day in a damp workshop and has 3 children in 2 rooms and hasn't slept properly in a month. A merchant's clerk who spends his days dealing with numbers that won't balance and comes home to a wife who is sick and a landlord who wants the rent early. These people come to John's shop. He measures the poppy syrup carefully. He always tells them not to take more than a small spoonful. He tells them it should make them drowsy, that this is the point. He tells them to put it in a little water or wine and drink it warm just before lying down. Most of them follow his instructions. Some of them come back for more the following week. The pepper on John's shelf came from somewhere in South Asia, India, most likely. It was shipped by Arab merchants to one of the Gulf ports. then transported overland or through the Red Sea or around the Horn of Africa, then to Alexandria or Beirut, then on a Venetian or Genoese trading vessel through the Mediterranean, through the Strait of Gibraltar, or more likely over the Alps by land, to Bruges or Antwerp, and from there to London. The number of hands it passed through. The number of months it traveled. The accumulated cost of each transaction. By the time it sits on John's shelf, the pepper has been among the most valuable portable commodities in the world. Weight for weight, it has been worth more than many metals. The spice trade is partly a luxury trade, a way of making food more interesting for people who can afford it. But it is also a medical trade. Spices are ingredients in medicines. The apothecary and the cook are not entirely separate figures in the medieval world. Both of them work with the same aromatic plants, imported at great cost, understood through the same medical and culinary framework. John sells pepper by the ounce. He sells cinnamon in small paper packets. He sells saffron, the most expensive thing in his shop by weight, in tiny quantities, measured out with care on his scale. He sells nutmeg, which comes from the same distant islands as cloves, and which in this period is thought to be useful for head colds and as a general warming medicine. All of it traveled a very long way to get here. John doesn't think about this particularly. It is simply how the world is. His last customer of the evening came just as he was beginning to close. A man about his own age, prosperous-looking but tired in the face in a way that goes deeper than one bad night. Someone who doesn't sleep. John can usually tell. The man asked, directly, for something to help him sleep. John asked the usual questions. How long? How often? Any particular cause that he knew of. The man said he couldn't say. 6 months, perhaps more. He wakes around 2 in the morning and lies there until dawn. Has tried wine, but wine makes it worse. Has tried exercise in the evening, but it keeps him awake longer. John gave him valerian root, which he wrapped in a paper packet with careful instructions. He also gave him a small bottle of the poppy syrup, the weak version, suitable for occasional use. He told him the valerian was for regular use. Steep a teaspoon of the crushed root in hot water each evening and drink it warm before lying down. The syrup was only for nights when the valerian alone wasn't enough, and only a small spoonful, and not every night. The man thanked him, paid, went out into the street. John watched him go from the doorway. The lane was dark already, the evening having settled in early. He folded the shutters closed. Went back to the counter. Finished the evening's accounts by the last of the candle. Not all intoxication in the medieval world was intentional. John knows about ergot. Most apothecaries do. Or rather, they know about the disease it causes, the falling sickness of fire, called in French Ignis Sacer, holy fire. The burning sensation in the limbs that begins before the convulsions. The hallucinations that come before the gangrene. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye grain, particularly in wet years when the grain doesn't dry properly. It looks like a small dark seed, almost indistinguishable from the grain itself at a casual glance. When it is milled with the grain and baked into bread, it passes into the bread, and from the bread into the people who eat it. It contains, among other compounds, lysergic acid, a direct chemical ancestor of what will be synthesized 600 years later as LSD. It also contains ergotamine, which causes powerful constriction of the blood vessels, which is what produces the burning sensation and eventually the gangrene in the limbs. In high enough doses, ergot causes convulsions that resemble epilepsy and visions, and a state of terror and disorientation that medieval people, understandably, attributed to demonic possession or divine punishment. In the year 994, an epidemic swept through southern France, attributed later to contaminated rye flour. Tens of thousands of people were affected. John does not think of ergot as being in the same category as his poppy syrup or his valerian. Ergot is a disaster. It is the thing that happens when the harvest goes wrong and the grain is not inspected carefully enough. But it is, in its way, also an intoxicant. One of the most powerful ever encountered by medieval people, and entirely accidental. He does not keep any in his shop. He would like to keep none of it anywhere. There is one more thing John knows about, which he has no preparation for, and which he would not sell if he did. The stories say that certain women, wise women, witches, those who have made pacts with darker powers, apply an ointment to their skin and fly through the night air to gather on distant hillsides and worship. John does not believe in the literal flying. He is a practical man. But the ointments themselves he finds plausible, in the sense that he can imagine what they might contain. Henbane, belladonna, aconite, wolfsbane, mandrake. All of them contain compounds that, absorbed through the skin, would produce exactly the kinds of effects that the stories describe: the sense of flying, the visions, the memory of impossible things. There are later records, much later, from physicians who investigated these claims, of people who took such preparations and, upon recovering, told of flying through the air and attending gatherings that could not possibly have happened. They had been somewhere. They had experienced something vivid enough to feel completely real. But they had gone nowhere. They had been in their cottages or their barns or wherever they had applied the ointment, in a state of powerful hallucination. This is not magic. This is chemistry applied unknowingly. John thinks about this sometimes. The way the plants produce these effects, not arbitrarily, but because the compounds they contain fit, with extraordinary precision, into specific places in the human brain. As if the brain had prepared for these compounds, or the compounds had prepared for the brain. He doesn't know what to do with that thought. He files it somewhere and closes the shutters. The candle goes out. John sits for a moment in the dark of the shop, letting his eyes adjust. He can make out, vaguely, the shapes of the jars and bundles on the shelves. The smell of the room is more apparent in the dark, as it always is. The spices more forward, the dried herbs more present, the faint underlying sweetness of the poppy syrup he made earlier in the week. He gets up, goes through the back room, up the stairs to his sleeping room above. His wife is already asleep. She is a lighter sleeper than he is and goes to bed earlier, which has been the pattern of their marriage for 22 years. He sits on his side of the bed, takes off his shoes. His feet are cold, as they almost always are. He lies down in the dark. The street outside is quiet now. The city, which is never entirely quiet, is at least quieter. Some distant sound from the direction of the river. He is not an anxious man. He has his valerian. He has his routine. He closes his eyes. The shop is dark. The city quiets. And we travel back now, out of London, out of the city, back along the roads that lead west and north through the October darkness, back to the country. Back to the flat fields of eastern England. Back to a village not so different from Thornfield. The night is deep now. Almost morning, though morning is still hours away. Let's rest here for a while. The village does not have a name tonight, in the way that places don't have names when you are moving through them in the dark. There are cottages. There are lanes between them, narrow and unpaved, the earth hard now in the first cold nights of autumn. There is the church with its squat stone tower, dark as everything else is dark. The whole world tonight is shades of dark. The dark of the sky, which is deep blue-black at the edges and black-black directly above. The dark of the fields, which are a different dark, closer to brown in the memory of them. The dark of the lanes and the walls and the thatched roofs, each a slightly different texture of dark. There is no wind. There is no sound but the occasional creak of something, a branch, a shutter, the settling of a building adjusting itself to the cold. The village has been drinking tonight. Not everyone. Not extravagantly. But the alehouse was open, and people went. The wise woman's remedies are in a dozen homes. The valerian in the pouch by the fire, the dried chamomile on the shelf, the small bottle of poppy syrup for emergencies. In the great house at the top of the lane, There is a small store of spiced wine left from the last feast day. The lord of this village does not live in a manor as large as Sir William's. He is a minor man, a local man, not much elevated above his tenants in the daily texture of his life. But he has his wine. And tonight, before he went to sleep, he poured himself a small cup of it. In her cottage at the far end of the village, Agnes is deeply asleep. She lies on her back, which is unusual for her. She normally sleeps curled on her side. But tonight she is tired in a way that spread her out flat, her arms at her sides, her breathing slow and even. The fire is banked. Just the faint pulse of the coals under their covering of ash. Her daughter sleeps beside her, curled up small as she always is, her face half buried in the thick wool blanket. In the other room, the barrels of ale stand in the dark. One of them is nearly empty. 2 more are ready. The ale stake is still out above the door, but it is invisible in this dark. The smell of the yeast is a presence in the room, familiar as breathing. Agnes doesn't notice it anymore. It is simply the smell of home, the smell of all the nights of her life. She doesn't dream tonight. Or if she does, it is something soft and without narrative, warmth, and the sound of the fire, and nothing in particular to worry about. The night continues. At the other end of the village, old Edmund is awake. He is almost always awake at this hour. His body has given up the effort of sustained sleep and now offers him something more fragmented, 3 hours, then wakefulness, then perhaps another 2 hours before dawn. He sits in his chair. The mead pot is on the table. He has already had his evening cup, hours ago, in the early part of the night. He is thinking about whether to have another. He decides against it. Not because he is abstemious, but because the first cup was pleasant and he does not want to dilute its memory. He sits in the dark. The fire is low but alive. He thinks about the bees. In winter they cluster together in the hive, in a mass of warmth, their wings beating to generate heat. They have been doing this, some version of this, in some form, for millions of years. Long before there were people to keep them, or to drink the honey they made, or to sit in winter cottages thinking about them. He finds this thought restful, in the particular way that very large spans of time are restful when you are old and the night is long. He closes his eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. The fire ticks. The mead sits in its pot, covered with its cloth. Outside, the dormant hives are silent. The fields beyond the village stretch out into a darkness that is almost total. The harvest is in. The fields are bare now, pale stubble visible in the starlight, the cut stalks no more than 2 or 3 inches above the cold earth. The sky above them is enormous. This is the flattest country in England, and the sky over it is like a ceiling that has been lifted away. Out here, away from even the small warmth of the village, the night is pure. No sound. No wind. Just the cold and the stars and the smell of turned earth and something vegetal and dormant, the last breath of the growing season settling down into the ground. Tomorrow there will be frost. You can feel it in the air. But tonight, not yet. A fox moves along the field margin, far off, a dark movement at the edge of something darker. It goes past without looking at anything and disappears. The stars move, very slowly. The way stars move when you are watching them closely, without blinking. In a cottage near the church, a woman lies awake in the dark, listening. Her 2 children are asleep on the other side of the room, one in a small wooden bed, one on a pallet of straw beside it. They are 4 and 7 years old. She can hear their breathing. Both of them, without trying. It is a sound she has trained herself to hear in sleep, the sound that interrupts a dream, that brings her fully awake from nowhere. Both of them breathe steadily. Nothing to worry about. Last week the younger one had a fever. She went to Joan for the valerian and chamomile, and the child had it in a little warm water with honey, and slept better for it. The child is fine now. Better than fine, running in the lane this morning, throwing mud at the chickens. She lies in the dark and counts the slow breaths. 1, 2, 3. There is no one who would describe this. Lying awake at 2 in the morning listening to your children breathe, as peaceful. And yet it is, in its way, a kind of peace. The most alert kind. The kind that only belongs to mothers in the small hours, in the dark, when everyone they love is close and breathing. She closes her eyes. Somewhere, in a monastery not so far away, the bell for Matins is ringing. The sound carries on still nights, further than you would expect. A single bell, low and regular, in the deep dark before dawn. The monks are rising from their cold cells. Brother Thomas among them, already awake before the bell, swinging his feet to the stone floor. In the village, the bell is too distant to wake anyone. It arrives as a sound at the edge of hearing, the kind you might hear if you were already awake and listening carefully. The woman in the cottage near the church hears it. She has heard it before, on still nights like this. She doesn't know exactly what it is. She knows it is the Abbey bell. She has never been to the Abbey. But she knows its voice. It rings 4 times. 5. then stops. The silence after it is complete. She pulls the blanket more closely around her. Her husband breathes slowly beside her, entirely asleep. The children breathe across the room. She is almost there herself now. Almost back down into sleep. Almost. Through the whole long night, in this small world of field and village and cottage, people have been reaching for what they needed. Agnes gave them her ale. Not much, enough. The faint blur of it, the loosening of the shoulders, the sense that the day was behind them and the night had no particular demands. Joan gave them her herbs. The valerian that helped the child sleep. The poppy syrup in the bottle on the shelf. The knowledge, passed down through her mother and her mother's mother, of which plants did what. Brother Thomas gave the monastery his wine. His steady attention to the barrels, his care for the quality, his understanding of when something was ready and when it wasn't. And the spice trade, impossibly distant, impossibly complex, gave the feast hall its Hippocras. The cinnamon that came from Sri Lanka to this Norfolk table, through 100 hands, to warm the beginning of a Michaelmas evening. None of it was quite medicine. None of it was quite pleasure. It was somewhere in between, in the territory that has always been the most human territory, where the body's needs and the mind's needs and the soul's needs are not yet cleanly separated. They drank what they had. They slept as they could. The village is quiet now, not silent. No place where people live is truly silent. There is always something. A dog turning in its sleep, a cow shifting in the byre, the groan of the well rope in the cold, the sound of Agnes's ale fermenting in the dark of its barrels. But quiet enough. The stars are at their deepest point, in the hour before they begin to thin out toward dawn. The sky is the particular shade of very dark blue that precedes the lightning that precedes the first suggestion of gray. Somewhere in the village, you might not be able to say exactly where, a fire has burned down to its last coals, and the last coals are still warm, and they will stay warm until morning when someone adds a fresh stick of wood and blows on them, and the cycle begins again. The wise woman's garden is still. The herbs on their stalks are motionless in the cold air. Old Edmund has finally fallen asleep in his chair. He will wake with a stiff neck in the morning, but right now he is deeply and completely asleep, his hands folded in his lap, his breathing as slow as breathing gets. The mead pot sits on the table. The bees are quiet in their hives. And so the night goes on, as it has for centuries. The fire burns low. The village sleeps. And perhaps, by now, so do you. They drank what was available to them. They found their relief where they could, In the alehouse at the end of a long harvest week, in the wise woman's herb garden, in the monastery cellar, at the feast table with its spiced wine. None of it was so different from what you might reach for tonight. A cup of chamomile. A glass of wine. The particular comfort of something warm, something that loosens just slightly what the day has tightened. People have always needed this. Some small softening at the edge of the day. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's nowhere you need to be. Nothing you need to do. The archive will be here tomorrow night, as always. Sleep well.